Welcome back to CBSN. This was such a momentous occasion, Meg. We saw Pope Francis deliver his remarks in English. The 78-year-old pontiff essentially learning English before his visit to the United States, said he wasn't very strong. We were listening to it, sounded better than, my mom's been in this country 45 years, and I don't think she sounds as good as the Pope does.
One of his first lines was that he is a son of an immigrant family, and embracing America and the immigrants that make up this country. A gorgeous day in Washington, D.C. Right now, the Pope is with the president in the Oval Office, and we are waiting for them to walk out here because, as we all know, this is a Pope that likes to get close to the people, and he's going to be coming out. There were tens of thousands of people who showed up on the South Lawn to listen to his speech, a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding this, and now they're going to get the chance, possibly shake hands with him.
That's right. And this is a Pope who, in those remarks that he delivered there at the White House, touched upon a number of issues that are facing not just the American people, but also our planet, and specifically the misuse, the abuse of the planet. At one point, he said, "We still have time to make the changes needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change." And he also went on to say that such change demands on our part a serious and responsible recognition, not only of the kind of world we're leaving to our children, but also to the millions of people living under a system which has overlooked them. And I think it's interesting that in that same phrase, not only talking about climate change, but also talking about the system of inequality that exists not only here in this country, where the gap between the rich and the poor is growing, but certainly around the world.
Right, and we're looking at a live picture right there where we were. Right now, this is where he was greeted by the president and the first lady. And as you mentioned, Vlad, talking about taking on hot topics such as climate change, this is not the typical script that you hear from a pope. You typically hear about abortion or the traditional family, but here he's talking about immigrants, climate change, global income inequality, and he's really taking on a different way as he goes through his visit here in America. As we watch and wait to see the Pope again, we're joined by our professor of theology from Notre Dame, Candida Moss, who's had a front row seat watching the special coverage. So what did you take away from his speech?
I thought it was both an incredibly warm speech given from the heart, but also a very intelligent speech. He used the language that appeals to Americans. He talked about solidarity. He's the son of an immigrant. We're a brother nation. And then he referred to the founding fathers and Martin Luther King. And this is not something you normally see from the Pope. This is a kind of language and idea that appeals to us, that we're familiar with. So I thought it was incredibly warm. I was surprised to see the environment up front and center.
Up front. Very first thing he sort of touched upon, other than the fact that he's the son of an immigrant, of immigrants. And he went on to point, which I think is hugely important to the American public, that this country was built by immigrants. I thought that was very powerful.
That's right. And he's going to use that to make his arguments that we need to create a country that's more open to immigrants. So it is very intelligently done. We can also see him answering some of his critics here. So he's been accused by some conservatives of having bad priorities and that he shouldn't put the environment first. And we can see him responding to that when he says that it's urgent and that we cannot leave this to a future generation.
You know what I also thought was interesting, Candida, and you touched upon it, is that a lot of people have expected that this Pope will be a liberal Pope, but he's not really going to be liberal when it comes to the issues that are important to the Catholic faith, which are same-sex marriage, for example. But I thought that by using the environment, and he also pointed out that it's not for future generations. He wants it now. When he talked about Martin Luther King, he talked about the promissory note that Martin Luther King talked about. And that was at Martin Luther King's Jr. speech to the White House. He was at the White House in August of 1963. The famous I Have a Dream speech. He talked about the founding fathers in this promissory note. The pontiff saying that we have defaulted on that promissory note.
That's right. He really is talking about urgency, and that is what he's been criticized for. I think it's also important to note, though, that he does touch on the hot-button issue of religious freedom in America, and he refers to the United States bishops. He uses, again, language that appeals to us, as in we should act as good citizens, he says, which is language that we embrace. But this is a veiled gesture to the HHS mandate and to the issue of same-sex marriage in America.
Well, he did talk about family, but not in the traditional sense from another pope might have. How did he touch on it in a way that shows support for gay marriage?
Well, he does use language of inclusivity, and that's language that is both biblical, but it's language that also appeals to liberals, you know, inclusive, embracing, and that is Francis's message. You know, Francis is someone who walks in the footsteps of Jesus, someone who cares for everyone, who's not about closing doors, he's about opening them.
Yeah, and in fact, we have, if you missed it, the Pope delivering those remarks at the White House. We have a little bit of that sound when he talks about how important it is to save our planet. Listen.
Climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation. When it comes to the care of our common home, we are living at a critical moment of history. We still have time to make the change needed to bring about a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change.
And joining us at the desk now as we take some live look at the right outside the White House now is Monsignor Thomas Figueiredo. We were just listening to the Pope tackle right off the top climate change. What did you make of his speech?
I thought it was a fascinating speech. He touched on four main areas, I would say, in a particular order. Family, the question of religious liberty. Thirdly, climate change. And fourthly, peace. In terms of climate change, it is very interesting. It is a religious message, actually, because we believe that creation was given to us by God, and we encounter God in creation. And so we have a duty to protect that creation in order that we can find God, who is love. I mean, when we see something beautiful, it raises our minds to the one who created what is beauty.
Monsignor, I thought it was amazing that the pontiff opened up his remarks by talking about the fact that he is the son of immigrants, and he turned it back to the U.S. saying, and he feels great to be here because this country was a nation that was built by immigrants. That is something that I think a lot of people, when we talk about the pontiff's visit here to the United States, there are a number of issues, not only climate change that he has seen himself align with President Obama, the issue of immigration. On the flight from Santiago, Cuba to D.C. yesterday, he gave remarks to some reporters, and he talked about how he had intended to come into the United States via Mexico. And you're looking at, are these live pictures? Okay, this is from earlier when the Pope was leaving the Vatican embassy there, and he waded out into the crowd, right into it, and started shaking hands with people, blessing the crowd, kissing the children. In fact, one man actually kissed the pontiff, and you could see the Secret Service sort of try to jump in there, but he clearly comes alive in these moments.
And we also saw, you know, what's really different here as you look at these pictures, all the cell phones and the pictures, and the president had mentioned that he is on Twitter too. How different is it in the social media world during his visit for him to get his message out? Is it a little bit easier, Candida?
It's certainly easier now we live in the world of Twitter. And in fact, the Pope's social media is going to be handled while he's here by the same company that handles the NFL and Shaquille O'Neal.
Okay.
So this is well managed. What you notice when you look at the pictures is that people don't just want to touch him. Now they want the selfies. So it's sort of like this two-pronged thing now.
All right, we are joined by our foreign correspondent, Allen Pizzey, who's on the south lawn of the White House. He had a front row seat there. Allen, just tell us, what is it like there?
I have to say right off the top that I was very, very impressed. I've been to a lot of papal welcoming ceremonies, and this one is at top of my list. It's not only the impressive venue, but just the way everything was carried out. What really struck me, though, was the Pope's speech. I've listened to a lot of them. He made this in English, and he didn't deviate more than about one word in the whole thing, mostly because he can't. But he hit all the notes that he wants to hit on this trip in this speech. He started off by saying that as the son of an immigrant family, I'm happy to be a guest in this country. And one of his points was pushing for better receptions for immigrants, if you will. He had originally planned to enter the United States like an immigrant across the Mexican border. For logistical reasons, that wasn't possible. But he did hit that note. And then he talked about guiding the nation's political future in fidelity to its founding principles. He spoke about how he was going to the eighth World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia later in the week to celebrate and support the institutions of marriage and the family. So if you look at the opening two paragraphs, the first paragraph would no doubt please the more liberal wing of the establishment here, and the next one plays right into a lot of Republican stances. And then he went on to talk about safeguarding religious freedom, which he said is of course one of the founding principles of the United States. And then he talked about the issue that's going to be the big hot button one, I think. He talked about climate change, he said, and he went fully out on the side of President Obama, saying, quote, "I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution." And he said that he made the point that climate change can no longer be left to future generations. And then, as one of the wags in the press corps said, he touched on America's non-religious saint Martin Luther King by quoting, using a phrase from Reverend King that we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now is the time to honor it. That's in reference to fixing up climate change. He then also spoke about mending broken relationships and opening new doors, which is a direct reference to the new rapprochement between Havana and Washington. And he said, "I would like all men and women of goodwill in this great nation to support the efforts of the international community to protect the vulnerable in our world and to stimulate integral and inclusive that's the page over to see what the quote was, models of development." I took that as a reference to helping migrants and also pushing more money into the developing world. And I think that those are the main points that he wants to hit on. Interestingly, President Obama echoed some of those, and President Obama used the word mercy a couple of times, and that's the theme of this papal trip, missionary of mercy. So I think we found a great meeting of the minds on that podium this morning, and I think that the Pope has set the tone for the way his visit's going to go. He's not going to back off from making the points he wants to make, but he does it in that very Franciscan, if you will, way, Francis way of nudging, and that's what we heard this morning.
Our foreign correspondent, Allen Pizzey, who is on the South Lawn of the White House, who witnessed it all live there in person. Allen, thank you very, very much for that insight. We appreciate it. We're back here in our studio with Candida Moss, who is our papal contributor here, and Monsignor Figueiredo. Thank you again both for being here. I want to ask you about, we've been talking about this for the last few minutes, about climate change. What's interesting is in that Laudato Si that the Pope released back in June, he says, though, there's some temperance there. He says that the planet is being destroyed primarily because of our reckless pursuit of profits. Now, whilst a lot of people may want to save the planet, that phrase there itself probably will anger some in this country who see perhaps that is not the function of a pope or the planet. Before we get to that, let's see here. We have President Obama and Pope Francis walking down the colonnade there at the White House. The president pointing out the beautiful rose garden.
It really is a special moment here because this is really where the Pope shines. He wants to get out. He wants to talk to people. That was his desire to coming to America, talking to people, shaking their hands. We saw some of those unscripted moments happen in Cuba when the one person really wanted to get to him. The security took him away, and he said, no, bring him back up. So, and I think that's really part of his charm, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. His willingness to reach out to people, his warmth, his love, the fact that he's willing to take risks with his own personal safety. This speaks to his genuine love of people. And that's something that people connect with and that makes them trust him.
And we see here, this is something that we've been remarking all morning long, that Pope Francis doesn't wear those red papal slippers, Monsignor.
No, really, I think that really...
Made by Prada, I know that.
That makes him an authentic person. He's often spoken that we need to be normal. And that's what he wore in Buenos Aires. Why would he change his shoes coming to Rome?
Monsignor, do you think when you look at the timing of him and when he came in, I mean, he was trying to retire. He reached the age of 75. He said, you know, I'm ready. And we waited for a year, and then he was anointed Pope. How important is the timing? Do you think, in a way, after we saw the Catholic Church go through such a dark period, that he's almost saving Catholicism right now in this generation? There's
absolutely no doubt about that. That's why we believe as Christians, as Catholics, that it's the Holy Spirit who chooses the Pope. Pope Benedict, who had the humility to step down and give space to Pope Francis, who really believes that he has been elected for a period of time with a mission. He's a man with a mission, and in the short time that's left for him, however long that's going to be, he's going to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Cleaning up in the church what needs to be cleaned up, giving the good news of the gospel, particularly to the weak, the suffering, the vulnerable, and truly being a shepherd who loves to be with his sheep. He often uses the term, we need to stay with the smell of our sheep. In fact, the cross he wears is a shepherd who is surrounded by sheep. Did you see those images this morning? He was surrounded by people, and that's what he really loves, and he's invigorated by that, you know? He's going to be with the homeless, he's going to be with the sick, he's going to be with immigrants. He's not out there for himself. He's going to be out there completely for the other. He's a great father. He's a great papa.
He is being seen by many, not just Catholics, but all people, as very transformative. This comes in the wake of Pope Benedict, who was quite ill at the end of his papacy before he resigned. I wonder, Candida, this Pope, when we first saw him appear after his election, I keep going back to that wonderful image when I think he probably surprised a lot of the Catholic faithful when he didn't appear in those red and gold ecumenical robes that we typically see a Pope appearing in. That sent a message from the very beginning that this was going to be a different kind of Pope.
That's exactly right. From the very beginning, we knew that there was something different about Pope Francis, and it was his humility, his willingness to be normal, to be like everyone else. And we saw that today when he pulled up in the Fiat. It was almost a humorous moment, this little Fiat dwarfed by his security detail.
It really was a contrast, wasn't it?
Yes.
But when you're on the papal platform, which is so huge, and you act with humility, that sends a real message to people. You know, the small Fiat holds up a mirror to our sort of culture of excess, and that's exactly what he wants to do.
And Monsignor, you said this to me yesterday as well, that culture of excess, in a way, has existed even in the church. For those of us who are Catholic, we see cardinals with their finery, and you know, there's a lot of gold, and you know, this seems to be a pullback from that.
It really is, and he's going back to the authentic Christian message. He's going back to Jesus.
And has it changed what you're seeing in parishes?
There's absolutely no doubt about that.
More people?
More people and greater simplicity, particularly amongst those in the higher echelons of the church. Bishops, monsignors, priests. We're going out to the people. We're not waiting for them to come to us. So that's key.
How is that helping the morale?
I think what I see, I work at a seminary training future priests, the numbers are skyrocketing.
Really?
With good men, good men. We all want to be like this Pope, and we're enthused by him, and we want to give our lives for others like him.
There we see the picture of President Obama and the Pope from earlier this morning. And to that point, Father, this Pope is the first pontiff to acknowledge the very ugly allegations of the child abuse, the child sex scandals that have plagued the church for many, many years, appointing a tribunal of cardinals to look into the matter. By no means saying that it has gone away, but something that, that clearly needs to be addressed by the church. Candida, would you say?
I think there are really deep wounds left by the pedophilia crisis in the church. And, you know, while some people think that, you know, perhaps we should just move on, which would be wonderful, these are wounds that persist for people and are especially deep here in America. And I hope what Pope Francis will recognize, especially by setting up a tribunal recently, is that this is the kind of wound that needs to be constantly tended to. It's not the kind of thing you can just sweep away.
Monsignor, do you think he would address celibacy then? Do you think that's something that he would take on?
He's certainly addressed it already. You know, celibacy is not a dogma. It's a matter. It's something that can change. I don't think he's going to change it, but he's certainly a man who understands openness, and he likes to listen and he likes to dialogue. That's his style. He wants to listen. He wants to dialogue. He wants to take into view everyone who's saying things, and if there has to be a change in the issue of celibacy, which in the Catholic Church we say is a matter of discipline, it helps us rather than a matter of dogma, I'm sure he'll move on it. Again, I don't think he is going to move on it, but he's certainly open, and I think that's a good thing.
Candida, to that point, there is an issue that some bishops have asked the Pope to look into, and others have said no, there should be no change in the dogma, which is that when it comes to couples who have divorced. And maybe you can explain this for our viewers. There are a group, I guess, of mostly German bishops who say, look, can you please look into this, Pope? And there's some Italians who say, no, this is the way it's always been. Can you talk to us a little bit about that schism and how Pope Francis perhaps might address it going forward?
Well, the issue in the Catholic Church is that when a couple marries, that's a sacrament, that's for life. So when they divorce, they need an annulment before they can remarry in the church. And this is obviously something that's very public. It's not the kind of thing that you could sort of get an annulment or get divorced on the sly. People know you have to go through this process. Now, this idea that marriage is for life, it goes back to the Bible, and a historian will tell you Jesus' statement that you cannot get divorced is actually one of the earliest statements he made. But it creates a practical problem, especially in our 21st century church, in that a lot of people are divorced and the annulment process is grueling. And so for a lot of people, they like to see what they see as sort of mercy on this issue, and that rather than having to get annulments, they could just be readmitted into the church after some period of reflection, or that perhaps the annulment process could be streamlined. And we have seen hints of that from the Pope. He recently did say that in straightforward cases of abuse or adultery, that an annulment could take place more quickly.
And that is clearly, it was interesting, at one point he married a group of people, and one of those that were married were a couple that had a marriage annulled. They had already had children. And I think that that is in line, Monsignor, with the Pope's message, which is we for so long have been strictly adhering to dogma. We should, as he's been saying all along, have more mercy towards our brothers and sisters.
Yes, certainly. For example, on Holy Thursday now, when in the church we wash the feet of others in line with what Jesus did at the Last Supper, you know, that was traditionally just men. But now he goes into prisons and he washes the feet of men, he washes the feet of women, he even washed the feet of other people from other religions, a Muslim, last year. Again, on the issue of abortion, that's interesting. He hasn't changed the teaching on abortion, but there's going to be a year of mercy now where every priest knows he has the faculty to absolve from the sin of abortion. So he's not changing doctrine, teaching, but he's finding ways for others to come back to the church through mercy, through compassion, through understanding. Why should we be stuck in past ways if we cannot move forward?
You know, that is a great point, and the Pontiff talked about that in his remarks. We actually have the moment when he talked about mercy for those that are in need. Let's play that out.
American Catholics are committed to building a society which is truly tolerant and inclusive, to safeguarding the rights of individuals and communities, and to rejecting every form of injustice, discrimination.
And Monsignor, after the Year of Mercy is over, what is the goal? What is he hoping to accomplish?
I think he wants this to continue forever. Mercy is the strongest message that the Church can give and any priest can give, because it was at the heart of Jesus' message. And I need mercy more than anyone else, and when I receive it, I'm the happiest man in the world.
It's a beautiful statement. We are going to take a quick break. We're going to ask Candida and Monsignor to stick around because there's a lot more of this Pope coverage, but we're going to come out of the break with some other news that we've been following, including that Turing pharmaceutical CEO who has decided to reduce the price of drugs. Also, Hillary Clinton, new controversy with the emails. We're going to touch upon that with our Nancy Quarters. Stick around.